Hey, what's going on? This is the Body Punch Podcast, and my name is Naz. Let's talk about Nate Diaz. So I think this is a cool thing that came up. Nate Diaz talked to Ariel Helwani. He looked like he was in good spirits after he took off the year of 2020. And this was due to a number of factors. This is not because Nate didn't want to fight. Obviously, we all know the pandemic affected a lot of fighters in many different ways. And Nate Diaz just felt the effects of it. He took off that year. We haven't heard from him for a very long time. And it's nice to see him back in the news. After being constantly called out after every single fight. You know, anytime we see someone fighting at 170 to 155, we hear Nate Diaz's name. He's a massive star in this sport. You know, even in this interview, they talked about Drake mentioning Nate Diaz, which was in an old interview. And that shows you the type of star power this guy has. I remember after the Conor McGregor fight, this guy was getting mainstream media attention that not many fighters in the UFC have gotten then and now. There's only a handful. But the star that this guy became after those two fights, and especially that first one where he defeated Conor McGregor, it made him into a megastar that was well deserved for a veteran of the sport. At the time, he was still a veteran. Now he's a veteran as well. So I just wanted to go through this interview because of how famous Nate Diaz is and how much people are calling him out. It shows you how powerful this guy is. Everybody's calling him out, and it shows you how much this is going to affect the UFC. So I thought this was an important topic to discuss and dissect this interview. So I made a list of things that Ariel and Nate talked about. And let's just run through this. So at the beginning of the podcast interview, whatever you want to call it, he talked about the fact that after the Masvidal fight, where that one got unfortunately ended because of a brutal cut that he got, he really wanted the rematch. And a lot of people at the time, and even now, I bet before this interview, were saying, why don't we do that fight again? The BMF title cannot be given to a person winning off a doctor stoppage. That's what a lot of people thought. And unfortunately, that fight never happened. Masvidal went on to fight for the belt against Kamaru Usman, taking that short notice fight, which I love to talk about. I love the story behind that, where Masvidal, I believe in a week's notice or whatever it was very short notice, took a private jet, flew to Abu Dhabi, got pizza on the way, and then fought against one of the baddest men on the planet. I just love that story. But Masvidal went on to go do that fight. And that's why we never saw Nate and Masvidal fight again. So that answers one of our questions right there. Another interesting thing that he brought up was he felt like he gave away the game plan of how to defeat Conor McGregor. He felt like Floyd Mayweather and his camp referred to his fights, especially the first one, and developed their game plan to defeating Conor McGregor based on that first fight. You know, the idea of it being that you take Conor into deep waters and then his power gets diminished. You know, Conor took that fight on a couple day notice after RDA fell out. We got to remember that fact. So that's why Nate, which he mentioned in this interview, gave Conor McGregor a rematch. And if we look into it, we all know the massive pay-per-view implications that it had, the payment that it had. You know, it must have been a good payday, and the amount of notoriety that Nate got from that fight must have been alluring for him as well. We can't just say that he believed in himself that much. You know, obviously Nate, he talked about it in this podcast, or interview, that he believes that he's never been truly defeated. And so back to the point, he believes that he gave out the game plan on defeating Conor McGregor. And that's what Floyd Mayweather used. You know, interestingly enough, he brought up the fighting style that Floyd Mayweather was implementing in that fight. And it's a style that we haven't seen him use. That might be due to the fact that he's fighting an MMA fighter. He saw some openings in the moment. But we all know Floyd Mayweather to fight in that Philly shell style. And not that peekaboo style. That Mike Tyson kind of style. We don't know him as a person implementing that. You know, when he was Pretty Boy Floyd, he was knocking people out. And at that time, he might have used it a little bit more. But we haven't seen it in this stage of his career. So it was interesting that he brought that up, and he also talked about the game planning. You know what? I bet you Floyd's camp reviewed the Nate Diaz fight. Obviously, they must have. You can't go into a Conor McGregor fight and not watch that first and second fight with Nate. I mean, that first fight, it showed a lot. You know, Conor McGregor is one of those fighters that isn't in the octagon that much. That's one of his reasonings for the Dustin Poirier fight and what happened in that one where he got defeated. He's not in there that long. And when you have a fight where he goes to decision, you know, the first one he got choked out, but the second one he goes to decision. It's very valuable. It's very valuable, and it shows you how a fighter will react in a 5-round fight. And they must have looked at that. You know, I don't think it's a kind of breaking news. But what Nate Diaz is saying here is that he's the one that broke the code of Conor McGregor. Let's go to the next one. So I thought this was a really interesting point that he brought up. He says that he wants to fight at 170 or 165. And again, another fighter is bringing up that 165-pound division, which I think would be very valuable for the UFC to implement. You know, the 155-pound division is such a shark tank. And to have a 165-pound division between that 170-pound division, I think it would be really valuable. Now, I see what Dana White's saying here. He doesn't want to break up. He doesn't want to dilute one of his weight divisions. I get that. But here's another fighter that brings up that 165-pound division. There's other people that have brought this up. And it doesn't look like we're going to get a catchweight fight anytime soon. So why not try something here? Nate has brought it up. And even in this interview, he says that he doesn't want to fight anybody at 170. Kamaru Usman, Gilbert Burns, they don't interest him. Nobody at 170 interests him. But he's interested in everybody at 155. So there's an interesting thing going on here. He's calling out people that are in the 155-pound division, but he wants to fight them at 165 or 170. You know, I thought I would highlight this point because, again, we have another fighter talking about this weight division. Maybe we should test it out. Maybe the UFC is not the best place to test it out. Maybe we should see how it works in other organizations. But the thing is that in other organizations, you don't have the talent pool of the UFC's 155-pound division. The Shark Tank again. So maybe we see how it goes. So the next thing I wanted to talk about, and this goes into the 170, 165 pound fights that Nate wants to have. But Nate mentioned that he wants to fight Oliveira or Dustin Poirier. These are two fighters who are on some hot streaks. Dustin Poirier, I believe, should even have the belt now. Oliveira, you can't deny his title contention. He should be fighting for the belt after, whoever it is. But the interesting part that Nate brought up is that he wants to fight both of these guys at 170. Dustin Poirier tweeted after this interview saying that why not fight at my natural weight class. And Dustin Poirier is a big guy. You know, at one point he was fighting at 145, depleting himself. Then he went to 155. And now this guy seems like he's even outgrowing the 155-pound division, which is nuts. But he's a big guy. Powerful guy. And it would be super interesting if the guy that we believe should be fighting for the belt or should have the belt is going to go up in weight. He's just kind of saying, you guys over here, do your own thing. I'm going to go and fight this guy, Nate Diaz, who he was supposed to fight before. Same with Oliveira. If he was to fight Nate Diaz, it's kind of like him saying, guys, you handle it over here. I'm going to go over there and fight Nate Diaz. So there's an interesting dilemma that's going on here. And Dustin Poirier seems interested in this fight. And like we've talked about before, he's interested in the Conor McGregor fight as well for the belt. So Dustin Poirier is just, man, he's making moves out here. It's fun to see. But the other thing is that Nate is calling the shots over here. He even mentioned that the UFC hasn't even contacted him. And this is how powerful this guy is. He's so influential. People are calling him out all the time, and everybody wants to fight him. And he's the one kind of dictating it a little bit because of his fan base. It's funny because I was laughing at the portion of the interview when they talked about satin sheets, and Nate didn't even know what satin sheets was. Maybe he was joking. But it just shows you how down to earth this guy is, but how powerful he is as well. Mind you, Nate Diaz, and this is not kind of smoke and mirrors, this is not behind the scenes kind of stuff. We should all recognize that that guy could buy as many satin sheets as he wants. He fought Conor McGregor twice. He's had a long career in the UFC. It's even funny because if you look at the background of Nate Diaz's set, if you would call it, it made him look like, you know, it was his office or something like that. But you compare that to a Conor McGregor interview, and he's got this nice background, good production level. Then you got the contrast of Nate Diaz in his hat, backwards hat, and it's just so interesting to watch. And this is why we love this guy. It's because the money hasn't really affected him. I mean, the guy's just gone out and bought more black shirts. It's great to see. It's great to see. What a character Nate Diaz is. So the next thing I wanted to talk about when it comes to this Nate Diaz interview was that he says that he is thinking about coming back in April or May. And he wants either 2 fights minimum, 4 fights maximum this year before the year ends. That's a lot of fights. He is planning to be very active. And hey, maybe 1 or 2 fights at 170 might change his mind on fighting at 155. So we don't even know if he might change weight classes again. This guy's so dynamic in his fights that we don't even know where he's going to fight next. We don't even know who he's going to fight now. He's called out Dustin. He's called out Oliveira. But this guy, you know, he pops in and out, so we don't really know. It's a mystery sometimes. And it's fun to discuss him. What an interesting guy. And he's such a key piece to a lot of these fights. Because think about it. If you got the top 5 fighters in the 155-pound division, and you tell them, hey, you can fight Nate Diaz, they might take that fight. And that might change the whole look of the 155-pound division, the way that it stacks up. Like if someone was supposed to fight someone else and they end up taking that Nate Diaz fight instead, it might kind of screw up a lot of things there. So that's why I think Nate Diaz is so important. That's why I think this interview is so important that I thought I would make a podcast about it. And again, thank you guys for listening to this podcast. I appreciate you guys so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to me talk. I really appreciate it. If you guys can like, subscribe, hit the bell notification on YouTube, that'd be amazing. If you can listen to the podcast on the different podcast networks, that would be great. And give a follow, give 5 stars, all that good stuff. This has been the Body Punch Podcast. My name is Naz. Bye.